let's just jump right in because today we are unpacking something pretty much all of us have experienced at some point, but very few of us actually understand on a biological level. We're talking about the compounding real world cost of sleep deprivation. And to really make sense of all the dense medical data we're looking at in this explainer, we're going to follow a hypothetical guy. Let's just call him David. We're going to track David through a full 24-hour cycle to see exactly how a lack of sleep fundamentally rewires his brain, messes with his career, alienates him socially, and threatens his long-term health. And the whole thing starts right here. I mean, have you ever been in David's shoes? You're lying there in the pitch dark. The house is completely dead silent, and you are just staring at the ceiling. It's 3:30 in the morning. Your body feels like lead, but your mind is running an absolute marathon. It's this agonizing, lonely kind of frustration that millions of people deal with every single night. But what's actually going on inside the brain at this exact moment? Well, what's really wild here is how insomnia essentially becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. David is lying awake, right? He's got these racing thoughts, he woke up too early, and he can't drift off again. But the real trap is what the National Institutes of Health actually calls the vicious cycle. Because he struggled to sleep before, he gets anxious the second he doesn't fall asleep immediately. That anxiety causes his stress hormones to spike, which, of course, makes it even harder to sleep. The more he just lies there watching the clock, the more wide awake he gets.
Okay, so let's fast forward to the next morning and see how this all starts to snowball.
So David has finally dragged himself out of bed and commuted to the office. But look, just because he's physically sitting at his desk absolutely does not mean his brain has clocked in. He is drowning in intense brain fog. And this is where the cognitive data gets genuinely alarming. Studies actually show that when you've been awake for 17 to 19 hours, which, by the way, is exactly what happens when you toss and turn all night, your cognitive performance drops to a level equivalent to a 0.05% blood alcohol concentration. And get this. After 24 hours, it hits 0.10%, which is over the legal driving limit. His prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that handles decision-making and attention, is just profoundly impaired right now. When you look at the clinical data comparing cognitive functions, there is a massive, undeniable gap between rested folks and sleep-deprived ones. The sleep-deprived group shows a ridiculously high rate of what researchers call false triggering, along with severe distractibility and memory lapses. So David isn't just feeling a little tired. On a neurophysiological level, he is literally struggling to process basic information at work. Now, zoom out for a second, because David's struggle isn't just a personal issue happening in a vacuum. When you look at the macro-level impact of everyone walking around with these cognitive impairments, the numbers are just staggering. The America Insomnia Survey found that insomnia is tied to nearly 24% of the overall costs for all workplace accidents and errors. Annually, we're talking about a cost of over $32 billion. So David's foggy brain is actually part of a massive, incredibly expensive public health crisis. But the costs here aren't just financial or professional. Let's jump to lunchtime. David heads into the break room and he feels totally alienated from his coworkers. Honestly, they even seem to be actively avoiding him. And what's happening here is one of the most fascinating and kind of heartbreaking discoveries in recent sleep science. Sleep researcher Matthew Walker at UC Berkeley summed it up perfectly. He said without sufficient sleep, we become a social turnoff, and loneliness soon kicks in. From an evolutionary standpoint, researchers found this crazy two-way street between sleep loss and social isolation. Brain imaging shows that when David is sleep-deprived, the networks that encourage social connection are impaired, while the regions that warn of human approach go into total overdrive. He is literally physically emitting an alienating vibe. To really wrap our heads around this, we have to separate loneliness from social isolation. Loneliness is subjective, right? It's that internal feeling of disconnection David has. But social isolation is the objective lack of contact. Sleep deprivation actually functions as a biological social repellent. David doesn't want to interact, sure, but his well-rested coworkers are also unconsciously perceiving him as socially repulsive and keeping their distance. Research even shows that well-rested people feel lonely after just a brief interaction with a sleep-deprived person. It triggers what scientists actually call a viral contagion of social isolation. Absolutely wild. All right, so let's jump ahead to that night. David is back in bed. He's exhausted. He feels incredibly lonely, and he is dreading yet another sleepless night. So what's his go-to move? He grabs his phone. And as he's lying there, staring at this bright screen in the dark, he starts spiraling. He's researching what this chronic exhaustion is doing to his body, and the stuff he finds online, it's terrifying. Mostly because the physiological risks are very real.
Chronic sleep deprivation practically damages every system in the human body. It tanks your immune system, messes with your hunger hormones, causing metabolic issues, and raises your blood pressure. A 2022 study even showed that middle-aged folks sleeping less than 6 hours a night have almost 3 times the risk of heart disease. So, yeah, his late-night panic, completely justified by the medical data.
But here is the massive irony. The way he's researching these health risks is exactly what's sabotaging his sleep. David is doom scrolling. He's consuming highly emotionally stimulating digital content right when he should be resting. These apps with infinite scroll and push notifications are designed to activate the brain's reward circuitry. This totally destroys the body's natural wind-down process and throws his brain into a state of cognitive hyperarousal. He is actively fighting off his own biological need to sleep.
Let's actually break down the biological chain reaction happening in David's head right now. Step 1, that smartphone screen is blasting high-energy blue light, specifically in the 400 to 500 nanometer range. Step 2, these specific photosensitive cells in his retinas detect that light and shoot a signal straight into his brain. Step 3, that signal forcibly suppresses the release of melatonin, which is the key hormone that runs your sleep-wake cycle. So, step 4, his brain is basically tricked into thinking the sun is still up, completely delaying his ability to fall asleep. But get this, it goes even deeper. Let's say David finally gives up, locks his screen, and puts the phone face down on his nightstand. He's in the clear now, right? Actually, no. Researchers found that just the mere presence of a smartphone in the room, even if it's silenced and flipped over, drains cognitive resources. Your brain knows that device is a potential source of incoming information, so it stays in this low-level state of hypervigilance. It completely ruins the exact environment you need for deep restorative sleep. So the next morning rolls around, and David is just completely done. He has finally reached his breaking point. He knows he can't fix this cycle on his own, so he does the right thing and books a doctor's appointment. Getting a real medical diagnosis is step 1. When he gets there, the doctor uses objective tools to measure his subjective daytime fatigue. They use something called the Epworth Sleepiness Scale, and it doesn't just ask, hey, are you tired? No, it asks him to rate his likelihood of dozing off in really specific scenarios, like sitting inactive in a public place or being stopped in traffic in a car. If you score high on this, it tells the doctor that your sleepiness isn't just an annoyance, it's a serious medical issue requiring targeted intervention.
Now, David actually brought a sleep checklist with him, which is honestly brilliant advice for anyone watching this. Going to a doctor and just saying, I don't sleep well, isn't super helpful. But bringing specific data, telling them exactly how long it takes to drift off, how many times you wake up, and what your exact schedule is, that allows the doctor to play detective. They can figure out if you're dealing with poor sleep hygiene, a shifted circadian rhythm, clinical insomnia, or maybe even sleep apnea. So, looking at David's data, the doctor lays out a game plan. And you might assume they just handed him a heavy prescription, but they didn't. Current medical guidelines strongly recommend cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, or CBTI, as the very first line of treatment. Neurologists emphasize that actually addressing the behaviors, the underlying anxieties, and the bad habits that are wrecking your sleep is safer, lasts way longer, and is often just as effective as popping a sleep aid.
So, what does it actually look like to fix this? Armed with actual medical guidance, David goes home and completely overhauls his evening. He implements a strict, source-backed routine to take his life back. First up, a mandatory digital detox 1 full hour before bed. No screens, no blue light, letting that melatonin naturally rise. Second, he adds in calming rituals, like a cup of chamomile tea, which studies show actually helps manage insomnia and even lowers systemic inflammation. And third, and this is arguably the most critical, he sets a consistent wake-up time, every single day. This is what locks his circadian rhythm back into its natural groove.
And if you're wondering if these simple tweaks actually move the needle, check out this super encouraging stat. One study showed that when adolescents just stopped using their phones 1 hour before bed, they naturally turned out the lights earlier and gained an extra 21 minutes of sleep per night, all within a single week. Reclaiming your biology doesn't take some medical miracle. It just requires intentional, consistent habits. Which brings us to the end of David's journey, and honestly, to a pretty important question for you. Take a hard look at your own nightstand tonight. Think about your evening routine and how you've been feeling at work lately. Are your daily habits actually helping you rest and recover? Or are they secretly acting as a cognitive and social repellent? Look, sleep isn't just downtime. It's the literal foundation of your health, your career, and your relationships. it might just be time to take back control of your nights. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you next time.